Okay, so let's unpack this. We're diving into something pretty critical today. It sits right where global climate action meets, well, the fundamental rights of people who've lived in and cared for forests for generations.
Yeah, exactly. Especially indigenous peoples and local communities.
Particularly in places like the Amazon, right?
Yeah.
Which is just so vital for, well, everything climate, biodiversity.
Absolutely essential. And you really can't separate conservation efforts there from the rights of the people who call it home. They're deeply intertwined.
Totally. And one of the big international tools for forest conservation and climate is REDD plus site.
Right. Reducing emissions from deforestation, forest degradation. It's basically a framework designed to encourage countries to keep their forests standing.
And within REDD plus, under the UN climate body, the UNFCCC, there's this really important concept, safeguards.
Yes, the Cancun safeguards agreed back in 2010 at COP16, and what's really interesting about them, I think, is their dual purpose.
Dual purpose. How so?
Well, they weren't just designed to, prevent bad things from happening, negative social or environmental impacts. They were also meant to actually promote positive outcomes.
Okay. So not just do no harm, but potentially do better, especially for forest communities.
Precisely. That potential is built right in. Sounds great on paper, doesn't it?
It really does. A powerful idea.
And here's the catch. The UNFCCC left a lot of flexibility for countries, how they interpret these safeguards, how they apply them within their own, national systems.
Okay, so flexibility. Good for practicality, maybe, but maybe less good for ensuring that do better potential is actually met.
That's often the tension, yes. It can mean the transformative potential gets a bit lost in translation or in practice. Potential versus reality.
And that tension is exactly what we want to explore today.
Yeah.
We're digging into the findings from a C4ICRAF study. It's summarized in an info brief. And it looks at how countries could use these safeguards, maybe more ambitiously. Not just avoiding harm, but really using them to strengthen the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities.
Focusing specifically on the case of Peru.
Right. So our mission here is to unpack what that study found about Peru's approach. What are the opportunities there? What challenges have they hit?
And what are the concrete recommendations? How can these safeguards be used as a real lever to advance collective rights on the ground?
Because, like you said, this isn't just policy jargon, is it? It's about real people, their lands, their cultures.
Absolutely. It's about how these big global goals meet national realities and impact actual lives, and how people can be partners in climate action.
Okay, so let's zoom in on Peru. The study points out something interesting right away. Peru apparently already has a fairly solid legal basis for indigenous rights.
That's right. Things like collective land titling, the right to free, prior, and informed consent FPIC, they're recognized in Peruvian law. The foundation's there.
I sense a but coming.
Well, the but this study found is in the practice. How the REDD plus safeguards specifically have been interpreted and applied in Peru, it's remained somewhat limited.
Limited, meaning not really tapping into that do-better potential we talked about.
Exactly. One of the study's authors, Juan Pablo Sarmiento Barletti, points out that while Peru's approach is maybe a step up from some other places doing REDD+, it hasn't fully embraced the, let's say, the full scope of rights recognized internationally.
Like under UADRIP, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples?
Yes, or even other key decisions within the UNFCCC itself. The national interpretation hasn't quite stretched to meet the potential outlined in those broader agreements.
Okay, I see. So the way they're using the safeguards for RED Plus hasn't fully aligned with the spirit of wider international norms on indigenous rights.
That's a key point from the study, but it also highlights an opportunity because Peru has that existing strong legal framework.
An opportunity how?
The safeguards could be used more structurally within that existing legal framework.
So not just as a checklist against negative impacts from a specific RDDD plus project, but maybe using the safeguard process itself to strengthen rights that are maybe a bit fuzzy in the current law.
Precisely. Tamara Lacheras, another co-author, puts it well. The safeguards could potentially clarify, respect, and strengthen rights that are maybe unclear or not well enforced under current Peruvian law.
Okay.
Which leads to the study's core question. If the national safeguard approach just kind of mirrors the existing legal situation, flaws and all, how can REDD Plus really live up to that promise of doing better for indigenous rights?
Right. It's about whether the safeguards just reflect the status quo or actively try to improve it. That makes a lot of sense. So based on that analysis, what does this study actually recommend? Where should Peru focus to, bridge that gap and genuinely do better?
Well, the recommendations are pretty interconnected. First off, there's a big emphasis on promoting self-determined land and resource management by the communities themselves, meaning really ensuring legal recognition of collective land rights, supporting Indigenous-led forest governance. The study argues this isn't just a side benefit, it's fundamental for REDD Plus to even succeed environmentally.
Okay, fundamental. And how could the safeguards help with that specifically?
They could be used strategically to help tackle the legal and administrative hurdles that often block communities from getting formal collective forest ownership, or even just accessing resources on their own lands.
Like bureaucratic roadblocks.
Exactly. Safeguards could push for resolving overlapping land claims, improving the processes for recognizing collective territories, basically using that safeguard framework as a tool to strengthen tenure security.
Okay, using safeguards to clear the path for communities to be real managers and partners. Makes sense. What else?
The next big one is ensuring truly effective prior consultation, FPIC.
Free, prior, and informed consent. Always sounds good, but often tricky in practice.
Very tricky. The study stresses the need for transparent, accountable mechanisms, and crucially, ensuring communities get timely, clear information, plus informed technical support.
Right. Otherwise, it's just a tick box exercise, not real participation.
Exactly. Without that support and clarity, it's just a formality. It doesn't empower communities to actually shape decisions affecting their lands.
Okay, so effective FPIC is key. What's another area?
Clarifying collective carbon rights. This is a big one.
Carbon rights, meaning who owns the carbon stored in the trees?
Essentially, yes, and who benefits from its value under REDD plus forests. Peru's constitutional court has actually said that the right to natural resources includes the right to benefit from their use.
Okay.
But the study points out it's vital to clarify if this explicitly includes the collective carbon in forests. When a REDD plus project generates value by keeping carbon locked up, who gets that benefit? Is it clearly the communities whose territories hold that forest?
That seems like a pretty fundamental question for equity, yeah. If you're asking communities to protect the forest, they should benefit from the value created.
Absolutely, which links to the next recommendation. Establishing a formal, equitable benefit-sharing mechanism specifically for REDD plus benefit.
A dedicated system for REDD plus benefits.
Yes. Peruvian law already says Indigenous peoples have a right to benefit from development on their lands and help set priorities. But what's needed is a concrete mechanism for REDD plus benefit sharing.
Yeah, importantly,
one that explicitly includes and empowers women, ensuring women participate fully in deciding how those benefits are managed and used within communities.
Crucial for equity, definitely. And probably for effectiveness, too.
Yeah.
Okay, so self-determination, FPIC, carbon rights, benefit sharing. What ties it all together? How do you track if any of this is actually happening?
That's the final key recommendation. Developing a robust monitoring, reporting, and verification system, an MRV system specifically for the safeguards.
An MRV for safeguards, not just for carbon.
Correct. The UNFCCC doesn't strictly mandate it, but the study argues having one would dramatically increase transparency.
How so?
Well, it would allow everyone to track whether the safeguards are actually being applied as intended. You could see where implementation is falling short, understand the barriers.
So it shifts the focus from just having policies on paper
to seeing the observable impacts and having accountability on the ground. It gives you the data to ask, is the promise matching the practice?
Right, makes sense. Okay, let's try and pull this together. The big picture takeaway from this deep dive into the CI4 ICRAF study on Peru. What is it?
I think the core message is this. Peru has a strong legal basis for Indigenous rights, which is great, but its actual use and interpretation of the REDD plus safeguards haven't fully grasped their potential.
They've been a bit limited, not quite reaching that do-better goal.
Exactly. They haven't fully leveraged the opportunity to actively strengthen collective rights beyond just reflecting the current, sometimes inadequate, legal baseline.
But the opportunity is there, the study suggests, by using the safeguards more structurally.
Yes, using them not just reactively to prevent harm from REDD plus man, but proactively within Peru's existing legal system to clarify and reinforce rights that might be ambiguous or hard to implement right now.
And the study gives a pretty clear roadmap for that.
It does. Things like tackling those legal and administrative hurdles for communities managing their own resources.
Making FPIC truly effective with real transparency and support.
explicitly defining those collective carbon rights.
Setting up fair benefit sharing, making sure women are included.
And building that MRV system for safeguards to track progress and see what's working and what's not.
It really underscores that even though the international rules left room for interpretation, this look at Peru shows that a more ambitious national approach is possible and may be necessary if you really want to support indigenous rights as a core part of climate action, not just an add-on.
Which really brings us to a fascinating, broader question for you, the listener, to think about. How do we balance national sovereignty, a country's right to interpret international guidelines like the Cancun Safeguards in its own way, with this global imperative to uphold indigenous rights?
Especially when indigenous communities are such essential partners in tackling climate change and biodiversity loss.
Right. How can international frameworks like the UNFCCC best encourage or maybe even ensure that countries go beyond the bare minimum, that they really aim for that potential of the safeguards to do better?
And what happens when that potential isn't matched by the practice on the ground? What are the real-world consequences of that gap? Something to definitely mull over.